Hello there, folks. This is Jim Walt, and I am attempting my first YouTube video. Now, the reason I'm doing this is that I ran into a problem with one of my automobiles, and in doing some research online, I realized that the problem was pretty widespread. So I thought that as I approached resolving the problem with my car, and did it successfully, I would do a video because I think it's worth having people know about this problem, and it has to do with lug nuts and lug bolts. Now, most Americans are used to having studs in their wheel hubs, and the studs go through the wheel, and then there's a nut that has a cone shape on one side that goes into a cone-shaped hole in the wheel at each stud. And that's what centers the wheel and also holds it in place tightly. And you have to torque the nuts on fairly tight. Well, a lot of European cars, and nowadays because various companies have mixed ownership, for example, Fiat Chrysler is an organization that started out with Fiat in Italy. And Fiat, by the way, owns Ferrari, Maserati, Alfa Romeo, and Lancia, all very famous race car names and high-performance car names. In any event, one of the cars that I have purchased in recent years is a Fiat Abarth, which is a high-performance version of the Fiat 500. And this vehicle, along with many other Chrysler vehicles, also General Motors vehicles, Ford, and Mercedes and others, uses an interesting sort of a lug nut or lug bolt. Now, a lug bolt is a little different than a lug nut because there is no stud. It's a bolt with a tapered head on it, and it holds the wheel onto the hub. And one of the problems that we're having is what is referred to on the internet as swollen, like you hit your finger with a hammer and it swells up. Lug nuts or lug bolts. And it's sort of strange that something that's made out of metal would be referred to as being swollen. But the thing is, there's a reason for that. And let's take a look at it real quick. And I'll show you my experience with the Fiat Abarth, which is a very nice automobile, but unfortunately the way that they're making lug nuts and lug bolts these days, I believe in order to save a few cents per lug nut or lug bolt, is really a bad design. And the truth is, I'm really surprised the manufacturers are using it. So let's show you in our video here. This is a lug bolt that came off of my Fiat Abarth, and as you can see, it is indeed a bolt. And you'll notice that the metal looks different on this end than this end. And the thing is, most of the manufacturers now are putting cast wheels on their cars, and the lug nuts and the lug bolts are exposed, so they want them to look nice. At least I believe that's what this is all about. And as you can see, this is a nice looking one. This one came off of my car brand new, and in its place I put a lock nut or bolt in that takes a special key, so you avoid having your wheels being stolen. So looks real pretty. These are supposed to be torqued to 75 foot-pounds. What happens over time, I think primarily, is the mechanics at your various shops get busy using their impact wrenches, and I think the impact wrenches, at least the one that put my lug bolts back in the last time my car was serviced, I think it was set in the order of 150 foot-pounds or twice. And what you can see is that this part of the lug bolt now is deformed. In fact, if you if you get real close, let's see if I get, uh-oh, my camera seemed to stop for a moment. You can see that the upper part of the cap of this bolt is different than the lower part. And in fact, if we put the two up here on the camera side by side, let's get a nice dark background for contrast. You can see how this one, the sides are nice and flat and parallel. If you look at this one, it bulges as you go down towards the bottom end or the nose of the bolt. This is what they refer to, or what they mean when they're talking about swollen lug bolts or lug nuts. And there's a reason for that. And the reason for that is that this is not one piece. This is actually made up of two pieces. And I'll show you what it looks like underneath this part in a moment or two. But this is a steel lug bolt, and this is, I believe, a stainless steel cap that is put over the top of it and then worked around the edge here to make it attach firmly. And it's all for appearance. This is 17 millimeter. Now, after the mechanics have worked your vehicle over and messed up the lug bolts or lug nuts with their 150 foot-pound impact wrench, this is no longer 17 millimeter. In fact, an 11/16 socket is what it takes to go over this. But the problem is that once this gets deformed and you have to go to a larger size socket, eventually this cap that's around the top of the bolt spins on the bolt and you can't get it off. Now that's not a problem if you're taking your car into the shop, but if you're in the middle of Nevada in the desert or down in the Mojave Desert in California and you get a flat tire and you want to change your wheel out in the middle of nowhere, your lug wrench won't work. So here's what I did to get that lug bolt out of my hub on my Fiat Abarth. Here's the end result. Let me see if I can hold this in a way that you can see how chewed up this cap is. This cap was spinning on this bolt. And I saw some people on the internet that use chisels and other techniques to try to get these off, or to get the bolt out, and that didn't look like it would work very well to me. And one video that I looked at, the guy that made the video suggested using a tool. In this case, this is an Irwin, I-R-W-I-N. I believe that's an Australian manufacturer. They call this a bolt grip. And as you can see, it's got a hex end on one end and a half-inch square drive for your socket wrench. And if you look on the inside of this, and let's see if we can get the light to show, there are ridges in here that are very sharp, and this is a hardened steel tool, so this will cut into these little ridges inside here, will cut into standard steel parts. Now, as it just so happened, this lug bolt was so deformed that I could just barely get this 11/16 onto it. And basically what you do is you put this guy on the end here, hammer it in place, hammering in this direction, and the serrations inside this thing are such that when you turn it counterclockwise it grips it tighter and tighter. Well, this just barely goes on. And so I also ended up using, looking for the size here, a 3/4 inch bolt grip. And this one, as you can see, on this very nice new 100% original lug bolt, slides on, and actually it really wouldn't do much good for you. But this one won't go on very far. And even on this one, I had to put the 11/16 on, pound it on, twist it, take it off, put this one on, pound it in, put this one in, pound it, twist it, and finally the 3/4 inch went far enough on to get a really good grip, and as you can see, it just about went down all the way. Finally got a good grip on not just the cap, but the lug bolt underneath it, that it was able to remove the lug bolt. And this took just about 150 foot-pounds to remove it. So once I got this out, I thought to myself, well, okay, well, I don't really understand what I'm dealing with here. So let's investigate a little bit further. So I took one of the lug bolts, put it in my vise, turned it upside down, and took a chisel all around the periphery of this cap and bent down the edges of that cap. It's not easy to get a good view here, so I'm going to move this around a little bit so you can see what I'm doing. So the only thing that's holding this on is that this rim here goes over the end of the bolt, but when you peel it back, guess what? It comes apart. Now, this is 17 millimeter. This is 16 millimeter. This is a perfectly fine lug bolt. The only problem is when it has a deformed cap on top of it, the cap spins, believe it or not, it spins. It kind of ratchets its way around because it's kind of tight, and then it slips and tight and slips. Anyway, so this helped me to understand what I was dealing with, and notice that the top of this bolt has a depression in it. So thinking about one of the videos that I watched, one of the guys on the video took a chisel and he went around the top of this lug bolt, put a chisel in against the top, and started peeling the sides of the cap down. And once again, focus is a little bit of a challenge here. And this was a, let's see, a little over a quarter, 5/16 wide chisel. And I was able to go in at an angle on the top and then get the chisel down between the bolt and the cap and peel each one of the flats down. Now the problem with this is, works good in a vise in your shop, but if the bolt is actually in place on your wheel, you probably don't have enough room right here. This is fun doing this. This is probably going to be rubbing against the inside of the hole in the wheel that the bolt goes into, and you can just barely get a 16 millimeter socket on there. Probably not enough purchase on the bolt to actually overcome the 150 foot-pounds that your mechanic down at the local dealership or at your tire store has put onto this lug bolt. And pretty much everything I'm talking about here applies to lug bolts and lug nuts. So my next experiment was to say, what else could I do to possibly get this cap off so I can use a 16 millimeter socket to get the lug bolt out. So what I thought to myself was, well, maybe I can separate this rim from the cap. So I went along, I'm going to grab a pencil here as a pointer. I went right along the base of each flat with a chisel at an angle and drove it down in, trying to cut this away from this. And that was moderately successful. It looked good, except that the top cap never did come loose, never would come loose. So I thought I'd try something a little different. And if you can look at this, let's see if we can get a good view. Focus is always an issue. So I took my chisel and I extended this chisel line all the way to the edge. I did the same thing over here. And then I went across the front. So if you look right in here, let's see now, you can see that I've put some pretty good score lines into this cap. And at that point then, I went to the top of the lug bolt, put the chisel in at a little bit of an angle to get it started from the center to the periphery, and then pretty much put it up straight and ran the chisel straight down. And what this did was it peeled the face of one of the faces of the lug nut or lug bolt cap away from the hex head that's underneath there, and I was able to get a needle nose pliers in there, work it back and forth a little bit, and actually get it off. Now, if you wanted to spend no money for the bolt grips, but you did have a small chisel, cold chisel, you could work your way around this guy and probably remove most of the cap and be able to put a 16 millimeter socket on this lug bolt and get it out. Now you got to remember, you're down on the pavement, or maybe you got the car up on a lift, and you're working in this little hole where the lug bolt is, and you're using the chisel and you're just beating away, and all of a sudden your hammer misses the end of your chisel and puts a nice chip in your aluminum cast wheel. This probably would work, but the truth is, only if you're really cheap and your time is worth nothing and you have a lot of time would this technique probably be the right one. However, these guys get the job done. Now, final statement here, and that is that I can't imagine that the manufacturers save more than, let's say, about 10 cents per lug bolt or lug nut to make them look pretty like this. I think it's a big mistake. I actually did my training early on as an automotive engineer, and actually worked for one of the big three automotive manufacturers in the United States. And I know a fair amount about product development and manufacturing. And I've been a mechanic my entire life, working on automobiles and motorcycles and even aircraft. So, and I'm a welder, machinist, and all of that kind of stuff, and did all my own work on my cars for probably 2.5 decades. Nowadays, unless it's something that I'm the only one that can figure out how to do it, I let guys that do it for a living do it, because they usually get it done right the first time. Although when it comes to these lug bolts, they're all doing it wrong. And the best thing you can do is, after you buy the bolt grips and get your damaged lug bolts off, you can replace them all with aftermarket, one piece, either chrome plated or a nice zinc plated lug bolts. And Otis down in Los Angeles is a manufacturer of those sorts of things, and a number of people on the internet indicated that they'd had good luck with those, and those are what are on my Fiat Abarth at the present time. And this became an issue for me, by the way, if you're still listening. I presently autocross my Fiat Abarth, and so I was going to need to take my stock wheels off periodically and put on my autocrossing wheels, and needed to be able to change these things out fairly quickly. And after the car gets serviced, I go around and loosen all my lug bolts one at a time and torque them to the proper 75 foot-pounds. Okay, that's it. I hope you got something out of this, and looking forward to seeing if people give me some feedback on YouTube. Thank you very much. Hope I didn't waste your time.